community leadership here, Jewishly, which has done everything to advance our situation. Do the Jews have a future in Australia? Izzy Liebler, a man to be much respected and admired, and made Aliyah some years ago, together with three of his 4 children and their families. When he was here, said that the diaspora Jewry doesn't have a future. He believed that the place for Israel, for Jews, is in Israel. And we are, as I say, a part of a privileged generation that is around once in 2,000 years when there is a Medina Israel, a state of Israel. It's a very wonderful thing, and all my life, because I'm really young, I've lived in that period. I referred to my education before, my upbringing. While I went to Mount Scobus, while I went to B'nai Akiva, while I spent a little bit of time at Beitar, the most serious part of education I learned from home, from my parents. And the background they came from, both religiously and both Zionistically. And my father, my late uncle, my late grandfather on my maternal side were all impressed by the teachings of Jabotinsky. And Jabotinsky was the famous one, the prescient person who identified before the outcome of the Second World War, before the terrible Holocaust that took place, he said, liquidate the diaspora or the diaspora will liquidate you. He died in 1940 and perhaps was fortunate that he didn't see that which he predicted took place. But there were people who did believe in him, and people who made Aliyah, and people who did leave, and people understood. One of those people was my maternal grandfather, who Mr. Zygmunt Stock, who was a noted Zionist leader here and communal worker. And that was the background of our family, both on the maternal side and on the paternal side, on both sides, to be involved. And so I guess I learned through the mother's milk and through the background of my parents an understanding of what took place in Europe, and even though my parents escaped it, my paternal grandparents did not escape it, and they, together with one younger brother of my father, were murdered in Auschwitz. And even though as a child I didn't really learn about it because it wasn't talked about much, later it did, and I became to understand that we have to recognise what's going on around us, and what's going on around us at different times is fed by different people. And our responsibility is several. One is to educate our children, to not be fooled. And we cannot rely always on our leadership. Sadly, our leadership doesn't always make the right decisions, not now and not in the past. Let me give you an illustration of that, because Chesky referred to Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan, there's his pictures up in the State Zionist Council in Beth Weitzman, together with Prime Minister Begin, Zichrono Livracha, and others. There's a very interesting book, came out in 2002 by a man called Michael Oren. It's called 6 Days of War. I commend it to you to read. And in it, he gives the background to Milchemet Sheshet HaYamim. Everybody remembers the build-up of tension, the closing of the Straits of Tiran, Egypt pushing out the United Nations, who were there to protect and separate, and immediately jumped. They were as bad then as they were in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and they were Canadians who stood by helplessly while 8,000 people were massacred. The UNIFIL at that particular time got out of between Israel and Egypt and simply vacated. UTANT said we're going out, and there was the climate for war. And those of us who were here, and I don't know what the situation is in other parts of the world, but certainly became very, very fearful of what would take place. Everybody knows the great success. I think it was Moshe Dayan who actually said, it's remarkable, that it wasn't just us, but it was God. I don't know if that's correct. If it's incorrect, perhaps I'm mistaken and deluding you. But what I want to tell you something is this, that in that book that Michael Oren, he goes through on a day-by-day basis an analysis of the cabinet meetings at that time. You'll recall that Levi Eshkol seemed very indecisive, and finally at the last minute he invited Menachem Begin to becoming part of a national unity government and others. And in the meetings as they prepared, the focus of Moshe Dayan, who had recently been appointed as Minister of Defence, was totally on Egypt. The Air Force attacked, tremendous success, nullified the effect of the Egyptian Air Force, and that was commenced the program of success. But what is remarkable is how most of the cabinet did not want to do more. They would have been yotze with Egypt. They would have been yotze. They would have been satisfied if they just fought Egypt. And they got dragged in to other arenas because of what took place. Syria attacked, fine, then there was a fight with Syria. Jordan attacked, they were begging Jordan not to fight, you know, and Jordan attacked, and so we fought back. And it was Yigal Allon, who was on that cabinet, who kept saying, this is the opportunity, we have to expand the borders, we have to take Israel out of what was described by Abba Eban as Auschwitz or Holocaust borders at the time, and the Prime Minister and Moshe Dayan in particular did not want to fight any of those arenas. The great hero didn't want to do it at all, and he resisted it for days. And they didn't want to attack the old city. It took 3 days before that happened, until those famous words, Har HaBayit B'Yadeinu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. It was Yigal Allon who was pushing it. It was the army itself that kept saying, we're ready to go, we're ready to go. It was David Elazar who was up in the Golan, said, I'm ready to take the Golan. Let me take the Golan. And he was impeded, I think, till the Thursday, before he could take the Golan and take Har Hermon, and look how important it was for the future of Israel. But the leaders at the time didn't understand the imperatives that were available. So we don't always know whether the leaders make the right decisions. We have to hope that they do it with positive intentions, and that they are guided by what they believe is best for Israel. And when I spoke last night in the presence of the Premier and the leader of the opposition and the Israeli ambassador and the Brigadier General Ruth Yaron from the army spokesman and these hundreds of politicians and others, I made sure to say that we believe that the government is making these major sacrifices, not only of the people who live there, but of the state, because it wants to advance peace. By the way, I was in Gush Katif just 3 weeks ago. I went down there for the day. When I was in Israel at the Zionist General Council, I always pursue a few self-indulgences, and one of them is to visit my family, the children of my auntie Erica, who made Aliyah in 1993, her sons Tommy and George, and their wives and their children and grandchildren, all of whom at the relevant age are part of the Hesder movement. The second thing I do is I walk the streets of Yerushalayim, and it doesn't matter where. I just love it, and it was great to see the crowds and the bustling life that had returned. And of course we understand, not because there's been a reduction in attacks at all, or the attempted attacks, 20,000 attacks attempted attacks over the last few years, but because of the success of Tzahal. And I believe, by the way, that it's Ariel Sharon who was the one who gave it teeth. Okay, so on one hand, you say one thing. On the other hand, he gave the strength to the army and said, go in there and do what you have to do. And that's been the success, and it's reduced the amount of successful attacks. The third thing I did, which was important, was apart from the participation in the Congress, was to go down to Gush Katif and to see what was going down there. Interestingly enough, I go to Israel every year, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 times a year, and it was the first time I'd ever been down to Gush Katif. And I had to go. I had to go for several reasons, because it may be the last time we'll be there. My kids have been there. How can I have not been there? Kara, my daughter, spending her shnat of learning in the Midrashat Harova, the last Shabbos, she said, Daddy, can I go down to Gush Katif? And of course we agreed, and she went down to Gush Katif. She didn't tell us till she got back that a rocket flew just over her and landed in the vicinity while she was waiting at the bus Motzei Shabbos to get out, and then the bus didn't go, so she had to spend an extra day there. But we went down to Gush Katif, and we saw the people